What was it really like to fight in a medieval battle in the year 1100? Not the Hollywood version with noble knights and honorable combat, but the actual, terrifying reality. If you think you know medieval warfare from movies and TV shows, prepare to have every romantic notion shattered. Let's start with something most people never consider. You probably didn't want to be there. Most soldiers in medieval battles weren't professional warriors. They were farmers, bakers, and peasants who got a message that basically said, "Your lord needs you to possibly die next Thursday." Bring your own weapon. The medieval draft was less, we need a few good men, and more, we need literally anyone who can hold a pointy stick. The average medieval soldier had about as much combat training as a modern person has experience in actual sword fighting, which is to say, none. Most peasant soldiers received maybe a day or two of instruction before being thrown into battle. The training consisted of, stand here. When we say go, walk forward. Try not to die. Your equipment was whatever you could scrape together. Archaeological evidence shows that many soldiers fought with modified agricultural implements. Nothing says elite warrior quite like charging into battle with your grandfather's turnip harvester. The journey to the battlefield alone could kill you. Medieval armies traveled slowly, about 10 to 15 miles per day. You'd march for days or weeks, eating stale bread and dried meat. Dysentery killed more medieval soldiers than combat ever did. Historical records show that approximately 60% of military deaths came from disease rather than weapons. The medieval version of died in service usually meant died in a ditch after eating bad porridge. Sleep was a luxury. You slept on the ground, often in the rain, surrounded by thousands of unwashed men. Medieval armies didn't carry tents for common soldiers. If it rained, you'd spend the night shivering and cursing your lord, your life choices, and whatever divine being had decided you deserved this particular hell. The night before battle was the worst. You'd lie there in the dark, listening to thousands of other men also not sleeping. Some did run. Desertion rates in medieval armies could reach 30% before major battles. Smart men, really. They understood that living as a fugitive beat, dying with a spear through your intestines. Morning came eventually. Not a glorious dawn, but a gray, cold morning where you woke up stiff, hungry, and terrified. The pre-battle breakfast, assuming there was one, sat like rocks in your stomach. Medieval soldiers often vomited before battle, partly from nerves, and partly because that morning gruel was genuinely toxic. Then came the waiting, hours of it. You'd stand in formation, your borrowed spear growing heavier by the minute, watching the enemy army across the field doing exactly the same thing. Both sides standing there, probably thinking, why are we doing this? Couldn't we just go home? The commanders would give speeches. You probably couldn't hear them. Sound doesn't carry well across hundreds of men. And even if it did, most speeches were in Norman French or Latin, which you definitely didn't understand. But you'd cheer anyway when everyone else cheered, because not cheering might get you noticed. Finally, after hours of standing, the signal came. A horn, a shout, a banner waving. Time to fight. Except you didn't charge forward like in the movies. You shuffled, carefully, because the ground was terrible. Medieval battlefields weren't chosen for their excellent terrain. Chronicles from the Battle of Tinchebrai in 1106 mention that fighting was delayed because the ground was most foul and treacherous. You moved forward in formation because that's what you'd been told to do. Not in neat ranks, but in a loose mob, trying desperately to stay together. The man next to you was a complete stranger, but now your survival depended on him not running away. It was the world's worst trust exercise. As you got closer, you could see the enemy clearly. They looked exactly like you. Same scared expressions, same makeshift armor, same, "What am I doing here?" energy. For a brief moment, you might have locked eyes with someone on the other side and shared a universal thought. This is stupid, right? But there was no time for reflection because suddenly the lines crashed together. The sound hit you first. Not heroic clashing of swords, but a thunderous roar. Metal on wood, metal on metal, and the worst sound, metal on bone. Screaming. So much screaming. Your ears would ring for days afterward, assuming you survived. Your shield suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The first impact sent vibrations up your arm that made your teeth rattle. Something hit you. You hit back. And suddenly, you were in pure chaos. You couldn't see the battle. You could barely see the man directly in front of you. Your vision narrowed to a tunnel of fear and adrenaline. This is what movies never show. How impossibly crowded medieval battles were. You weren't gracefully dueling. You were packed shoulder to shoulder, being pushed from behind, while pushing forward yourself. It was less combat, and more the world's deadliest mosh pit. In this crush, fighting technique went out the window. You had maybe 6 inches of space to work with. Sword swings became desperate jabs. Medieval combat was less art of war and more aggressive shoving match where everyone had sharp objects. The smell was overwhelming. Sweat, blood, and literal fear. When humans are terrified, their bodies release stress hormones that smell. Multiply that by thousands, add blood and piss, and you've got an olfactory nightmare. If you could bottle that smell, it would be classified as a war crime. Your world shrank to pure survival. The grand strategy vanished. Your goals became simple. Don't fall down, don't get stabbed. Maybe stab someone else first. 2 minutes in, your arms already ached. Holding a shield while people kept hitting it was exhausting. Modern recreations show that fighters become dangerously fatigued within 10 to 15 minutes. The heat was unbearable. Even in cool weather, the exertion turned your body into a furnace. A padded gambeson was basically a winter coat designed to stop blades. Wearing one while fighting was like running a marathon in a sleeping bag. Medieval soldiers had 2 enemies, the opposing army and the sun. The ground transformed into a nightmare surface. Blood made it slippery. Men fell and became obstacles. Some weren't dead, just wounded, and they'd grab at your ankles seeking help. If you fell, you had seconds to get up. Battlefield archaeology shows that many died from trampling rather than weapons. Death by crowd crush meant your family couldn't even claim you died bravely. You just got trampled. Let's talk about what actually killed people, because Hollywood gets this wrong. Swords were the least common cause of death. Why? Most soldiers didn't have them. Swords were expensive. A good one cost the same as several horses. Knights had swords. You had whatever you could carry. Most soldiers fought with spears. Simple, cheap, effective. Historical records suggest 60 to 70% of medieval infantry carried spears. They were the AK-47 of the medieval world. The advantage was reach. You could stab someone from 6 feet away. The disadvantage was that spears became useless once everyone was packed together. Axes were popular, battle axes were essentially wood-chopping tools modified to chop through shields and people. They required minimal training. Swing hard, and physics did the rest. The downside? Axes frequently got stuck in shields or bones. Getting your axe stuck was the medieval equivalent of your sword getting stuck in its sheath. Embarrassing and potentially fatal. Maces solved a problem other weapons couldn't. Plate armor. As armor improved, cutting became useless. The solution? Stop cutting and start crushing. A mace was a metal ball on a stick designed to dent armor and break bones beneath. Interestingly, many religious knights favored maces because technically they didn't shed blood. Medieval logic: thou shalt not kill, but crushing someone's organs is probably fine. Then there were improvised weapons. Farm implements repurposed for war were shockingly common. Pitchforks, flails, sharpened shovels. Peasant armies often had 20 to 30% fighters, using modified farming equipment. These were surprisingly effective, mainly because nobody trained to defend against gardening tools. But here's what actually killed most people. Not the initial combat, but what came after. A sword cut looked dramatic, but wasn't necessarily fatal. What killed instantly were strikes to vital areas: head, neck, chest. And these usually came from unexpected angles. Your armor protected your front, but attacks came from everywhere. Head wounds were particularly devastating. Most common soldiers didn't have proper helmets. A solid axe hit to an unprotected head was instantly fatal. Even with a helmet, you could get concussions or brain bleeding. Medieval neurosurgery consisted of, let's hope he wakes up. Analysis of medieval skeletons reveals a horrifying pattern. Most fatal injuries show multiple strikes to the same area. This wasn't honorable combat. This was someone being knocked down, and then multiple attackers piling on. Medieval battle doctrine was less, defeat your opponent fairly, and more, get him down, then make sure he stays down. Blunt force trauma from maces caused internal injuries impossible to treat. You might have no visible wound, but your organs could be ruptured. Soldiers would seem fine, then collapse hours later from internal bleeding. Medieval doctors called this the delayed death and had no way to prevent it. Even minor wounds were dangerous. A small cut could become infected and kill you. Bacteria thrived in medieval filth. Weapons weren't clean. Battlefield medicine was performed with tools maybe wiped on someone's tunic. Infection was almost guaranteed. Tetanus killed many battle survivors weeks later. There was no treatment. You'd die in agony, your muscles seizing. Blood loss happened much faster than movies suggest. The human body contains about 10 pints of blood. Lose 2, and you'll become dizzy. Lose 5, and you're probably dead. A severed artery could drain you in minutes. Soldiers bled out on the battlefield, fully conscious, watching their lives pour out while others stepped over them. There were no battlefield medics in 1100. If you were wounded, your options were keep fighting, fall down, and hope nobody trampled you, or crawl away and hope someone helped later. Usually, nobody would. But let's talk about what happened to your mind during this chaos. The human brain isn't designed for medieval combat. Time distortion hit first. Minutes felt like hours. Hours passed in seconds. Survivors consistently reported having no clear sense of time. Your brain's internal clock just gave up. Direction became meaningless. In the chaos, you'd quickly lose track of which way was safe. Studies show that 60% of medieval soldiers couldn't identify their orientation during combat. This led to soldiers fighting desperately to reach what they thought were their own lines. only to realize they'd been moving toward the enemy. Friend or foe recognition became nearly impossible. Your side wore certain colors, but within minutes, those were covered in mud and blood. You might fight beside someone and have no idea if they were with you or against you until they tried to stab you. Friendly fire casualties were significant. Getting killed by your own side must have been particularly frustrating. Your perception shrank to a tiny bubble. You couldn't see the overall battle, couldn't tell if your side was winning. You could only see the few men immediately around you. For all you knew, everyone else had fled, and you were still fighting because nobody told you to stop. The conscious mind shut down, letting instinct take over. You stopped thinking and started reacting. See movement, swing weapon. This automatic behavior kept you alive because conscious thought was too slow. Your body fought while your mind went elsewhere. This dissociation was commonly reported. Survivors described feeling like they were watching themselves fight from a distance. Some remembered nothing of actual combat. Your brain, unable to handle the stress, essentially checked out and left your body to figure things out. And then, sometimes without warning, it became too much. Your mind would simply decide it was done. Medieval chronicles mentioned soldiers who fell into a trance during battle, becoming completely unresponsive. The mind rebooting because it encountered a situation it couldn't process. And that moment of shutdown was often fatal. For those who kept their heads, there was still the question of what to do when the battle turned. Medieval battles rarely ended with one side destroyed. More often, one side would break and flee, triggering a chain reaction. This wasn't necessarily cowardice. It was survival instinct combined with mob psychology. Routing was contagious. One man would flee. The man next to him would flee. Within moments, an entire section could collapse. Chronicles from the Battle of Bourterud in 1124 describe how an initial break of a handful of soldiers became 1,000 men running within minutes. Running from battle was extraordinarily dangerous. You had to turn your back on armed enemies. You were wearing armor, which made running difficult. You were exhausted. And the enemy cavalry was specifically tasked with chasing down fleeing soldiers. This is where most killing actually happened. Cavalry couldn't charge organized infantry, but cavalry against fleeing men? That was a massacre. If you avoided cavalry, you still had to avoid friendly fire. In the chaos of retreat, trampling by your own side was a serious risk. Medieval panics were stampedes, and being caught in one was often fatal, even without enemies nearby. Some tried to fake death. This worked occasionally, but came with risks. Battlefields were cleaned by looters who'd kill wounded enemies while stripping valuables. Playing dead might save you initially, but could result in your throat being cut by someone looking for boots an hour later. Others would beg for mercy. This worked if you were a nobleman worth ransoming. But common soldiers? You weren't worth ransoming. Mercy was unlikely. Many nobles just killed surrendering common soldiers because keeping prisoners was expensive. The smart survivors knew, run early or not at all. The middle ground, fleeing once defeat was certain, was actually the most dangerous option. But let's say you survived. The first thing you noticed when fighting stopped was the silence. After hours of deafening noise, the relative quiet was unnerving. Your ears were ringing so badly, you might not hear properly for days. Many soldiers suffered permanent hearing damage. The second thing was the smell. Blood has a distinctive metallic smell. Opened bodies smell worse. Add human waste, and you had an olfactory nightmare. Chronicles mention the smell could be detected from miles away, particularly in summer. The third thing was your body. Adrenaline wore off and suddenly you felt everything. Bruises you didn't know you had. Cuts that went unnoticed. Your muscles ached with bone-level exhaustion. Your hands wouldn't stop shaking. This was your nervous system trying to process what happened and failing. You'd check yourself for wounds you didn't remember receiving. Medieval soldiers often discovered injuries hours later, with no memory of getting them. Your brain had been so overloaded, it simply hadn't recorded every injury. Then came the search for friends. You'd stumble through the battlefield, stepping over bodies, looking for familiar faces. Some celebrating their survival, others wounded, begging for help. And some staring at nothing. Their story ended in the mud. The battlefield became a grim marketplace. Soldiers would strip the dead of anything valuable. Armor, weapons, boots, even clothes. This wasn't disrespectful, it was practical. Medieval recycling was thorough. Nothing went to waste if it was valuable. Field hospitals became crowded with the wounded. These weren't sterile facilities. They were tents or barns filled with men lying on straw. The air was thick with blood, sweat, and fear. Medieval triage might survive, probably won't, and definitely dead, but not removed yet. Treatment was brutal. Arrow in the leg, pull it out, pour wine on it, wrap it. Broken bone, set it, splint it. Missing limb, tourniquet, cauterize with hot iron prey. Gut wound, make them comfortable because they were going to die. Amputation was the solution to most serious limb injuries. No anesthesia, except maybe alcohol. Most patients were held down while they screamed. Survival rates were about 30%. Most developed infections and died within weeks. Sleep was difficult. You were exhausted, but your mind wouldn't shut off. Every time you closed your eyes, you saw the battle again. What we call ptsd was rampant, though they had no name for it. Medieval understanding of psychological trauma was non-existent. If you seemed physically fine, you were expected to return to normal immediately. The return home was anticlimactic. You'd arrive exhausted and traumatized, only to find life had continued without you. Crops needed harvesting. Your family was glad you survived, but needed you working immediately. Medieval disability benefits didn't exist. If you couldn't work, you'd likely become a beggar. Reintegration was jarring. The skills you'd learned, how to kill efficiently, how to ignore suffering, were useless in peacetime. You'd been trained to react violently to threats, but now needed to interact peacefully with neighbors. Some never adjusted. The memories never faded. Years later, a smell could trigger flashbacks. The sound of metal could make you flinch. You might be working when suddenly you're back there, in the mud and blood. Medieval veterans lived with constant trauma reminders in a world that didn't understand their suffering. Children would ask, "Father, were you brave? Was it glorious?" And you'd lie. How could you tell your child the truth? That war was horrifying and meaningless, that you'd been terrified every moment. So you'd tell them what they wanted to hear and hope they never learned the truth firsthand. The lords who'd started the war rarely suffered consequences. They might be captured and ransomed, held comfortably until their families paid. Then they'd return to their castles and start planning the next war. Common soldiers went back to poverty, often poorer than before. Medieval warfare was primarily a wealth transfer, from the poor who fought to the wealthy who collected spoils. And what were those spoils? Land, castles, rights that benefited nobles. The common soldier might receive a few coins if lucky. More likely, nothing except the assurance he'd done his duty. The reward for surviving was the privilege of fighting in the next battle. The cycle continued. New wars started. New generations were conscripted. The promises were always the same: glory, honor, wealth. The reality was always the same: mud, blood, terror, trauma. But every generation included men who thought, maybe this time will be different. It never was. Medieval battles in 1100 were nothing like movies show. They weren't noble clashes between honorable warriors. They were chaotic, terrifying events where frightened men with poor equipment tried desperately to survive while accomplishing vague objectives for lords who viewed them as disposable. The glory of medieval warfare was a lie told by people who never fought to people who hadn't yet. If you survived, you carried the scars forever. If you died, you became a statistic, a body in a mass grave. Your family might never know how you died. You'd just be gone. Another casualty of medieval warfare's mindless brutality. And perhaps worst of all, your death probably accomplished nothing meaningful. The war might have been resolved by negotiation, making the battle pointless. Or your side won, securing your lord more land, which benefited him tremendously, and you, not at all, since you were dead. This was medieval warfare in 1100. Not glorious, not honorable, just humans hurting other humans in organized ways, for reasons that mostly benefited people who weren't fighting. The only real winners were the sword makers and grave diggers who had steady employment. So next time you watch a movie with noble knights charging valiantly into battle, remember the truth. Remember the mud, the fear, the confusion, the random violence, the pointless deaths. Remember that behind every glorious victory were hundreds of terrified men who didn't want to be there, dying in ways their families would never know about. Also, some noble could claim slightly more territory. The real heroes weren't the ones who fought bravely. They were the ones who survived and tried to rebuild normal lives, despite carrying memories no human should bear. And the real tragedy is that we kept doing it, generation after generation, because we never learned the simple truth that medieval soldiers knew. War is hell. Glory is a lie. And the only victory is going home alive. If this video shattered your misconceptions about medieval warfare, leave a comment below. What surprised you most about the reality of battles in 1100? Did you think medieval combat was more honorable, more organized, or less terrifying? Share your thoughts, and don't forget to hit that like button. Every like helps us continue bringing you the unfiltered truth about medieval history that Hollywood won't show you. And if you want to dive deeper into the real medieval world, the brutal truths, the forgotten stories, and the historical facts that challenge everything you thought you knew, subscribe to Medieval Tales. We're here to strip away the romantic myths and show you history as it actually was. Messy, violent, fascinating, and absolutely nothing like the movies. Hit that subscribe button and join us as we explore the reality of medieval life, one uncomfortable truth at a time. Trust us, the real history is far more interesting than the fairy tale version.